Oh, hello there. I didn't notice you there. I'm reading the book Justice by Michael Sandel because the criminal justice system is a very important topic when it comes to debate. And so you need to know all about justice and punishment if you want to do well in debates, because one of the key topic areas of any debate tournament will be the criminal justice system. So let's talk about the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system is basically the system that deals with administering punishment to criminals. And so a lot of the criminal justice system motions in debate have to do with how we punish criminals, why we punish criminals, and what kind of punishment we give to these criminals. First, I kind of want to talk about how we punish criminals and how this has to do with debate. And punishing criminals has to do with a factor of 5 different principles, or I like to call them the 5 pillars of the criminal justice system. These 5 pillars are isolation, proportionality, rehabilitation, deterrence, and retribution. And each of these pillars go into deciding how we punish criminals and what we punish. So let's talk about all 5 of these pillars and what they mean and how they are a part of the criminal justice system. So the first pillar is isolation. And the principle of isolation is very, very simple. The people who commit crimes in society must be isolated from the other people in the society. So if you kill someone, you need to go to jail so that you can't kill again. If you steal from society, you need to go to jail so you can't thieve again. And that's why jail time is usually the appropriate response for the criminal justice system to a crime. Of course, the amount of time that you're being isolated depends very much on the crime that you committed, because if it is a more severe crime, you need to be isolated for longer so that you can protect the other people of society. The second pillar is proportionality. And proportionality just means that the crime and the punishment need to be equal to each other. So if it was a more severe crime, it needs to be a more severe punishment. And severeness of punishment can either be on the length of the punishment or on the nature of the punishment. For example, if you're sent to a maximum security prison that has very few comforts, the proportionality of that punishment will be higher because it will suck to be there. However, if you are sent to a very nice prison, a prison that has a lot of comforts, the proportionality will be lower because, again, your punishment is less severe. Proportionality has a lot to do with fairness and giving people the fair treatment that they deserve for the crime that they committed. As we see that fairness is important when administering justice because we see unfairness as not being just. So proportionality is a huge part of the criminal justice system. On proportionality, the worst punishment that can be given to the offender is death, the death penalty. The third pillar in the criminal justice system is rehabilitation. And this idea is on rehabilitating and reintegrating prisoners back into society. Because these prisoners, or at least most prisoners, are going to be able to go back into society unless they have a lifelong sentence or they have the death penalty. So how can you give them the punishment that allows them to change as a person and become a better person so that they can be a valuable member of society? And rehabilitation has a lot to do with giving prisoners training. It has a lot to do with giving them treatment and therapy so that they can get over their problems and become valuable members of society instead of criminals. In rehabilitation, there is more of an idea of compassion and seeing criminals as people who have just done a wrong who need to be given a second chance. And thus, in the pillar of rehabilitation, you help society by helping prisoners become better. The fourth pillar is retribution. And retribution is basically a fancy word for revenge. Retribution has to do with the fact that victims want to see perpetrators, want to see criminals pay for their actions. So if somebody had killed your friend, you would want that person to see justice and to be punished. And so retribution has a lot to do with appeasing the victim's feelings and emotions so that they can move on from the grief that they are feeling. Of course, since these victims or the family of the victims are highly emotional and they want to see punishment, they want to see as much retribution as possible. However, if you just look at the perspective of the victim, you might become a little bit lopsided and focus too much on hurting the criminal. The last pillar is deterrence, and it's kind of similar to retribution in the fact that it leads to the same results. Deterrence is punishing criminals so that you can prevent crime in the future. The harsher the punishment, the less likely that other people will commit that same crime. So if you put somebody in jail, they're more likely to be a good example of what happens to criminals if they do bad things. Does deterrence work? Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. But for deterrence to work, the punishment needs to be severe enough that other people don't want the punishment. A very good example of this is Singapore, a country that has the death penalty for drug traffickers. And this has been very effective in lowering the drug trafficking rate in Singapore. However, something that's important about deterrence is it fair to focus on making criminals into examples and punishing them harshly so that you can prevent future crime? So those are the 5 pillars of the criminal justice system: isolation, proportionality, rehabilitation, retribution, and deterrence. And a combination of all 5 of those principles is what creates our criminal justice system. However, if you focus on one of those principles more than the other principles, your criminal justice system will look different than another one. So for example, a lot of Scandinavian countries focus more on rehabilitation, and a lot of autocratic countries focus a lot more on deterrence. What is more just? What is more effective? Well, it's hard to say, because if you want to treat prisoners like people, you want to focus more on rehabilitation. However, if you want to make criminals more scared of breaking the law, you want to focus more on deterrence. And a lot of criminal justice system debates revolve around these 5 pillars, and which of these pillars is more important than the other. Very often, rehabilitation will be one of those main key pillars, but also retribution and deterrence will be on the other side, fighting against rehabilitation. Of course, there are also some very key stakeholders, key actors in any criminal justice motion. So each step of the process towards justice has a very important stakeholder. The process of catching criminals has the important stakeholder of the police and the police force. The process of deciding punishment has the very important actor of the court system, which has many actors within it, such as judges and lawyers and juries. And then the prison system is the last really important stakeholder. The prison guards and the prison companies and the prison complexes, that is another important stakeholder. Of course, the stakeholder that you're talking about is really different depending on what type of motion you're talking about. Is your motion about catching criminals? Is your motion about punishing criminals? Is your motion about deciding appropriate punishments? Each step of the criminal justice system is represented by different types of motions. However, what we're missing here in the key stakeholders, the most important stakeholder in these debates is the criminal themselves. Because the criminal, even though we don't have a lot of sympathy for the criminal as societies, criminals are the most affected by the criminal justice system, because they're the ones that receive punishment, they're the ones who are rehabilitated, and they're the ones who need deterring.
So those are the main principles and pillars of the criminal justice system. Make sure you think about the stakeholders, make sure you think about those 5 pillars. Of course, there's a lot more that you can learn. You can learn about the harm principle, you can learn about paternalism, and I would highly recommend you look into those 2 terms. But the criminal justice system is a very fun and enjoyable debate topic that you can really win as long as you understand the main principles of justice and the main principles behind the criminal justice system. So yeah, those are the 5 pillars, and I hope they've helped you with understanding the criminal justice system. I will see you next time, okay? That one was bad. Let me leave this way.